Good evening, everyone. My name is Carrie Harlow, and I work with VSAC's Career and Education Outreach Program. I'm a VSAC Resource Center advisor, and I work with families in Chittenden County. Tonight, we'll be going over financial aid and managing college costs. We'll speak specifically tonight to seniors and parents of seniors, but we hope that any juniors and parents of juniors or younger in the room will be able to kind of take this information and project it to a future year. We know that families are absolutely overwhelmed by the idea about paying for college and how to go about doing it. This presentation is intended to provide a general overview of the idea of paying for college, the roles that you as families and students play, and the options that you have. This presentation, though, can't cover everything. We have a number of resources available on our website. There are also videos that Federal Student Aid has put together on YouTube, which families can use for assistance when filling out the FAFSA, as well as making their way through the financial aid process. We'll be pausing to ask questions during this presentation. If you want to put your question in the chat, that will be a great place where we can get that information and be able to answer those questions. So the key to this process is really communication. About plans, we have student and parent involvement in the college search and selection process, along with counselors, teachers, advisors, coming up with good college matches that meet expectations for both parents and students, like distance, programs, housing, placement rates. Research involves finding out about the true costs, net price, which we'll talk about tonight, as well as other things like acceptance of AP and maybe dual enrollment credit. And while it's great that everyone's on the same page from the start, it may be likely that parents and students have different unspoken expectations about this process. Whose responsibility is it to find the schools to apply to complete the steps in the process, and whose primary responsibility is it to come up with funds to help pay? Who'll have what roles in this process? For instance, who's the deadline person? And what can we, and to what extent can families and students help each other? And, does anyone have veto power? And if they do, who is that? Talking through all these thoughts and expectations in advance can really help families focus on making those good college matches in that sweet spot. And you can make informed decisions that are not only well thought out, but also financially sound. So let's start with one of the scariest slides of this whole presentation, right? You have heard about the cost of college. And so the NE expensive colleges in New England, expensive college, we've got some in-state options as well. And this assumes a full-time student with the full cost of attendance at that institution. So they're going, for the full-time credits. Cost of attendance not only includes the billable costs like tuition and fees, but also for UVM, Vermont State University, CCV, what the housing and meals costs will be. And the all years figures or assumes no increases in costs and no extra time spent in school. And the idea here is really just so that we know the advertised price. We want to acknowledge that what you have already heard about the costs of college, it's not totally exaggerated. And also that costs can vary quite a bit. Every college, every trade or career school has a price, and you can see how it adds up. In the cases above, I just want to mention that CCV, Community College of Vermont, and Vermont Trade School, they list the cost for a student living at home with their parents. It includes the cost of commuting, like gas from home, books and supplies, and some personal expenses, but no housing or meal costs. CCV uses a higher cost of attendance than just tuition and fees and a book allowance. If we were to use tuition and fees and books, it might be closer to $9,800 a year for an in-state student commuting from home. For the trade school, the tuition fees and book supplies is closer to $28,250 for a student commuting from home if you weren't including costs like gas and things like that. But here's the thing. Net price is what the cost of attendance at the school that you're interested in minus the gift aid that you receive will equal what you need to pay. And that is actually the net price. What we were just looking at was sticker prices for institutions. Let's talk a little bit about net price.
Carrie, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to have you
Sure.
share your screen. Just your screen isn't showing up yet, so I'm just going to
It's
have you do
not.
that.
I was sharing it in Zoom. That is so weird.
Sorry.
Oh, I apologize, everyone.
Sorry. I was waiting for a good time to interrupt.
Oh, please. Yes, let's try that again. Okay. Um, where is it? Sorry, it'll just take me a second to find out where I am. I apologize, everyone. Sorry about that. I had shared it before, and do you have it now? Sorry, Naomi, looking for a nod. Do you have the screen now? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. All right, give me just a minute. So let me go back because, oh my gosh, you're going to want to see these costs, right? Here we go. So I'm going to go back and let's talk about that advertised college price. This is the scariest slide in the whole presentation, probably. And what we're looking at is the costs of these colleges, right? The cost of attendance, which includes for the expensive college, UVM, and Vermont State University, the cost of tuition and fees, living on campus, which will be housing and meals, as well as some personal expenses and books included in there. Community College of Vermont and the Vermont Trade School is actually for a student who's commuting from home. And so that's the tuition and fees, as well as books and some extra expenses in there. When we talk about tuition and fees and books only, Community College of Vermont is closer to $9,800 this year. And the Vermont Trade School is actually closer to, let me get that price for you again, $28,250 for students commuting from home, just for the books, supplies, and tuition and fees. So that net price is the cost of attendance at those institutions minus the gift aid that a student would receive. And by gift aid, we mean grants and scholarships. And we'll talk a little bit about more in a bit. And that equals what you need to come up with, right? And that might be something you come up with loans. It might be something you come up with savings. We'll talk about that some more too. But let me show you this net price, right? The cost of 1 year full time versus the net price. Suddenly, you see that there's a big difference here. These are the averages for all first year full time students in the last full year reported. So this would probably be from the 22-23 school year. Excuse me, because we are in 24-25 school year right this minute. So that New England Expensive College, you can see most families on average are not paying that full cost. And remember, the cost is the cost of college minus free money, like grants and scholarships. The net price does not include student or parent loans or college work study. And while these are average net prices, I just want to remind you about a couple of things. One, dependent students, so students who have to report their parents' information on forms. Students who are Pell eligible may be able to attend University of Vermont tuition and fee free through the Catamount Commitment Program. Students and their parents who make less than $75,000 per year can attend UVM tuition and fee free through the UVM Promise. For families making less than $75,000 a year, CCP is tuition free this year through the 802 Opportunity Program. And Vermont State University this year announced that families who make less than $50,000 per year qualify for a free tuition guarantee there. So some students and families might find that their net price is lower, and some may find that their net price is higher than the average amount that's published. Doing the research on programs like UVM Promise, 802 Opportunity, and Vermont State University's free tuition guarantee, that can help students and families understand more about the true cost of college for them. There are also a number of college and trade schools that are eligible for federal student aid. Two examples in Vermont are Advanced Welding Institute and O'Brien's Aveda Institute. For these types of programs, the aid that we're going to talk about tonight also applies to them. There are also many non-federal aid eligible programs in Vermont and around the country that aren't eligible for federal student aid, but they would be eligible for the Vermont Advancement Grant from VSAC. These grants would be based on a student's financial need, but they will not follow the same process as we're talking about tonight. But you can find more information about advancement grants on the VSAC website under Paying for College and Training. I think under grants, it's the last grant listed that you can find more information about. So for instance, some students who are using that are doing courses to get a CDL, or they're going to lineman school, or they're training to become a phlebotomist. Those types of programs would be eligible for VSAC advancement grants. But let's talk about a tool that you can use. The College Scorecard is a website that's managed by the U.S. Department of Education, and is a place where you can find colleges either by searching by a specific name, or you can use a search like distance, location, degrees offered, or majors. There's a link on this webpage. For instance, when we post this online on our VSAC website, you'll be able to link right to that. But if you Google College Scorecard, you're going to get right there. But there's also in-depth information about admissions, graduation rates, placement, and median salaries of all recent graduates, as well as the average net cost for certain income bands. There are links from the College Scorecard to specific net price calculators at the colleges and universities that are referenced there. And so you can input more specific information on those net price calculators on the college website to really get a more focused feel about what the net price was for freshmen from the previous cycle. I just want to add one caveat to this, and that is for state-supported institutions like state colleges or universities, the net price listed on the scorecard is the net price for in-state students only. So for instance, if you're looking at USC, University of South Carolina, if you're looking at that particular school, you really want to go to their net price calculator on their website. Every college that receives federal student aid has to have a net price calculator on their website. So you can often find it on the financial aid information page. The other thing I want to point out to you or highlight for you is the median salary information by major after graduation, as well as median federal debt by major. I think that's helpful, as one guideline recommended is that students cannot or should not borrow more cumulatively than what they can reasonably expect to make their first year out of college. I'll say that again. One guideline that's recommended is that students should not borrow cumulatively more than they can reasonably expect to make their first year out of college. And so that's a guideline that families can use. In addition to the College Scorecard, another site you may have heard of is College Navigator, and they also have similar information. They also have tabs where you can find more information about campus safety, student demographics, as well as accreditation. But for need-based financial aid, the family really has the primary responsibility to pay for education. This is sort of the logic behind need-based financial aid. And what that means is that financial aid that's need-based is meant to assist families with paying for college, but not be a substitute for the resources the family already has. What this does not mean is if the school costs $89,000 a year, that the parents have to take out a checkbook and write a check for $89,000. That is not the case at all. It's just that there's going to be an application process that students go through in order to determine the family's resources, and then financial aid that is need-based will be determined from there. We want to recognize some common thoughts. Another topic for communication for the family, remember we were talking about that before, is who might have responsibility for this. Students will receive the requests, but who in the family is responsible for replying and sending the necessary information? And how will the students share those requests with their family? And where might you be keeping track of this information? Let's take a minute to pause and talk about the types of financial aid. I know many people may know this already, but sometimes there are people who don't quite know yet, so I want to share this with you. Grants are considered free money. They are usually based on a student's financial need. They do not have to be paid back. Scholarships are also free money, and they're usually based on grades, a student talent or ability, maybe a portfolio or audition, or maybe it's athletics or community service. Scholarships might be awarded by a college as part of the admissions process, but there may be additional applications needed, and that's going to be another thing for students and their families to research. And there are other scholarships that students can apply for through VSAC, as well as in their local community. Work study is where a student finds a job on campus. They're deemed eligible to work and earn money toward their personal expenses at school. It's not an amount that's paid toward the student's bill, unless the student plans to walk that paycheck down to student financial services. It also doesn't guarantee a job or earnings. Students have to get the job and they have to work to get the hours paid. And sometimes people will say to me, well, how is that financial aid? It's financial aid because the federal government actually pays the college or university part of that work study funding so that colleges can have these jobs for students. And then finally, there's loans. It's just like they sound. Loans are borrowed money to help pay for educational costs. It involves interest rates, it involves repayment terms, and it does need to be paid back. There are certain applications that our students need to submit as part of this process. First is the free application for federal student aid. And I'm sure many of you have heard FAFSA before. This is the form they're talking about. We'll get more into it in a bit. Students and families should also file the Vermont grant application, as well as any college financial aid forms. So one specific financial aid form that colleges may require that's extra is called the CSS profile. And the profile is required by some colleges. We'll talk a little bit more about that form later as well. But it's important to keep that in mind, that that is a third application that may be involved in this process. There are then scholarship applications that students will be applying. At VSAC, we also have some career-focused funding applications. This year we have Vermont Trades as well as the Vermont Nursing Scholarship. So it might be worth it to check out those funding applications. And then finally, usually the latest in this process is filling out loan applications. That usually happens after a student has chosen their college and before they head off. Do we have any questions so far, Naomi, in the chat?
No questions yet that I can see.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about this process a little bit. How and when to apply. There's this thing called an FSA ID. It's also interchangeably called a student aid account or a federal student aid account, CFSA. At least one parent and any dependent student, so a student who has to report their parents' information, must create their own unique FSA ID. It takes some time to set up. More security equals more questions. And in order to apply, your FSA ID needs to be completed and cleared through the checks in the federal process, which usually takes anywhere from 3 to 5 business days. So you need to do this in advance of filling out your FAFSA. You also will need to set up two-factor verification to access your account information. We want to remind you to use a non-school email address, students. Your CVU email address will be closed after you graduate from high school. And you want to be able to get those reminders and get that information from federal student aid. So using a non-school email address means you will keep getting that information. I mentioned this information has to be verified in advance of filling out the FAFSA. They will actually recommend, if you start a FAFSA without an FSA ID, they'll recommend that you do that first and come back later. Okay, so let's talk about that FAFSA, right? You need the FSA ID in order to fill that out. It is a required form. And what I mean by that is that any student who's applying for financial aid, even if only What you want the student to be eligible for is a federal student loan. You have to fill out this form. There are some colleges that also require this form because they want to make certain that students have exhausted all their other options before they look to the college's institutional aid. It's a simplified form, and my understanding is, I do know last year's FAFSA was really difficult for a lot of families. It is going to be much better this year. They're actually doing some beta testing as we speak, and they're making sure that before this form enters and opens by December 1st, it will have a lot of the bugs worked out of it. So we're pretty confident about that. We're hearing good things about the beta testing right now. Students need to use the 2025-2026 version. The seniors this year will use that version. It's the year the student will attend college. I tell you this because 2024-2025 is still on the FAFSA as an option because some students will be starting college this January and they're still filling out the form. You want to check the college deadlines. College deadlines will vary from college to college. You can fill out the FAFSA in December, and if you decide to add a college later, you can. You can just go into that submitted and completed and processed FAFSA, and you can add colleges. But there is room for up to 20 colleges that can receive FAFSA information. So hopefully what we're thinking is that you will not necessarily have to go back in and add more schools because 20 should be plenty. Naomi, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I'm looking at the chat right now here, and we do have a couple questions for you, Carrie, related to the FSA ID. So can you talk about specifically how they get the FSA ID and the difference between the parent ID and the student FSA ID?
Sure thing. So the student will need to obviously have an FSA ID. They go on the FAFSA website and there's a place to create an account. And you can go on there and you can fill out a thing to create this FSA ID, which is basically just a username and a password. And they'll have more questions on there, like some security questions. They'll ask if they can verify through your email. If you list a cell phone, you can verify through your cell phone. You cannot share email addresses or cell phones with this FSA ID, student to parent. So each one has to have their unique cell phone number, their unique email address. As far as parents go, finding out who has to fill out an FSA ID, Federal Student Aid has on their website a really great tool that's a which parents required on the FAFSA wizard. And you can go on it and it will lead you through certain questions about who did the student live with? Are the parents living together, biological or adopted parents? Are they living together? If they're not, who provides more financial support to the student? So they'll get into that in determining whose information is needed. If the parents are together and they're married filing jointly, only one parent needs to do it. If the parents file separately and they live together, each parent will need an FSA ID. If the student lives with one parent more than another, it will be that parent who's going to be on the FAFSA. And if they are remarried, the parent and step parent. So really important to figure out who needs that ID and then going out and make sure to get it. So the student will create their own, the parent will create their own, and that's how they will enter that FAFSA when it's available.
Thank you.
Okay, great question. All right, so let's shift gears a minute and talk about the Vermont grant application. After filling out the FAFSA, the Vermont grant application will be just like a piece of cake. And it is already open to Vermont residents. We opened the afternoon of the 1st of October. Again, we want to make certain that students choose the year that they will attend college. That's really important that we know this. Additionally, students want to apply early. They want to check their status online, and they want to make sure to complete their to-do list. And then students who want to do this, they can fill out their forms online. They can upload documents. For instance, if a copy of the parent's tax returns is being requested, they can upload those documents on their My VSAC account. And they do have to create their own My VSAC account and set up that multi-factor authentication before they apply. When you sign up for a My VSAC account, really at this point, only the student needs a My VSAC account. It will be their account. They are applying for the Vermont grant. It is also the way that students will apply for VSAC scholarships. Let's talk for a minute about the CSS profile. That is already available, but it's only required for some colleges. So this requires some research, again, on the student and their family's part. Which college requires this form? It's a form that costs money. It's $25 for the first college, and then I think it's either $16 or $19 after that. So you want to make sure only to apply to the schools that require it. And they do have a fee waiver for families who make less than $100,000 a year. Again, students have to use the 2025-2026 version. 2425 is up on that website, so you've got to pick the right one, the year the student will attend college. It is required for those colleges' institutional aid. The federal aid comes from the FAFSA. And there may be earlier deadlines for early action and early decision applicants. So, for instance, I'm going to pick on University of Vermont because this year University of Vermont is requiring the CSS profile from students, and they have said that their deadline for early action and early decision 1 applicants is November 15th. So that is a form that needs to be filled out. You can fill out the form online. As a matter of fact, the only way to file the form is online. They do not have a paper form. And you can upload the required documents to the institutional document center. And so, for instance, if 3 of the colleges on your CSS profile require a copy of the parents' taxes, you can use the IDOC page to upload it once, and then the other colleges will all get that information. For help, we really want you to refer to the CSS profile FAQ page, their frequently asked questions page. They have a really robust one and they have a lot of information there. Or you can also call the College Scholarship Service customer service line at 844-202-0524. And their hours right now, their support hours are Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. So they are available for your questions if you are wondering about what the wording of something means or what specifically they're asking about. They can give you help. All right, let's talk about determining financial need, right? We talked about the fact that they look at the family's resources and from there decide what the student will receive. The SAI from the FAFSA is the starting point from which federal and college financial aid will be determined. And what they're looking at is income. They're looking at taxable and non-taxable sources of income. From for this year's class, it will be 2023 information. So for the 25-26 school year, you use 2023 information. Those were the taxes that were just recently filed. Also the family size, how many people are living on that income. They'll compare it to the federal poverty level for a given year. So they are using 2023 tax figures for looking at the federal poverty level. Maximum Pell and minimum Pell are based on a percentage of that federal poverty level. And so if the family has a certain income, boom, they're eligible for maximum Pell, or boom, they're eligible for minimum Pell. Anything in between there, they do have a calculation that they're doing manually and determining that SAI. And so they're also looking as part of that, if they need to go beyond the maximum Pell Grant to find out what the family qualifies for, they will also be looking at the family's assets. Any questions about that, Naomi?
Sorry, Carrie. There's a question just about the timing of the FAFSA coming out December 1st and the Vermont grant being available now, and if that impacts Vermont grant likelihood with the later FAFSA.
That's a great question. I'm glad somebody asked that. I think what we say at the Vermont Grant Program, it's actually listed on the FAFSA too, as far as deadlines. It says first come, first served.
Mhm.
We are accepting applications as soon as October 1st, but we probably will not be able to do our first awarding until late March, early April, because we're waiting on the appropriation from the Vermont legislature. So anything between October 1st and that first awarding, you're in fine shape. It's after that that we'll keep awarding students until we run out of money. And so what I would recommend is, get your application in. If you want to wait until your FAFSA is done to do your Vermont grant application, that's fine. You can certainly do that. But applying right now will not make a student eligible for more money than if they wait until December. It should be fine. And I should mention, December 1st is not the deadline for the FAFSA. It's the first day it's open. So many colleges have a FAFSA line. What I want you to know is that December 1st is not a deadline. It's just the first day.
Great.
And what I would probably recommend if I were recommending people working on the FAFSA, even though they're doing beta testing, it seems like the first day the website gets hit really hard. And if something's going to go wrong, that's the day. So I often recommend that people wait a couple of days before they start their FAFSA. Don't do it opening day. Give it a chance, and then go in and do the FAFSA then.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question about if a parent can use an existing FSA ID that they may have for a child who's already in college.
Yes. So if a parent has an FSA ID already because they had an older child in college, or because they have their own student loans that they're using an FSA ID for, they can definitely reuse that. Your FSA ID or your FAFSA account is your account. So you don't need to create multiple ones. I'm glad that person asked that question.
Great, thank you. And then the next question that we have on here is about how family size is factored into the financial need with the past few years change to the FAFSA formula.
So family size has not changed with the FAFSA formula. I think the piece that has more changed is the number of college students in the household. There used to be, if you had two students in college, they would take what was known as the old EFC, and they would split that in half because you didn't have the family contribution more than once. Because it's a totally reworked calculation, they're no longer looking at the number of students in college. So that is a change. But what I will tell you is that some of those CSS profile schools are still using number in college for their institutional financial aid. So while it doesn't matter how many are in college at the same time for federal aid or for state aid, with institutional aid and the CSS profile, many of those schools are also looking at how many students are in college. All right, I'm going to move on. And we're going to talk about maximizing financial aid, right? How do you maximize the type of financial aid you can get? Well, one of the ways is to do well in school and challenge yourself, to increase school or community involvement. I cannot tell you how many scholarships now I have seen that say that community service is a part of their scholarship. There's one scholarship in the VSAC book that is probably specific to CVU because it's for students in Shelburne, Charlotte, and Heinsberg who have community service. So that is very specific, I think, to CVU students and about community service. In addition, the FAFSA and Vermont grant application are really just the facts documents. We want families to be encouraged to communicate special circumstances to financial aid offices as well as to VSAC for the Vermont State Grant. The reason why we recommend that is because we don't know if you're struggling because someone has lost their job and 2023's income is nowhere near what you're living with this year. Or we also don't know if, for instance, your home was damaged by flooding or something like that. Make sure to talk about those things. And whenever you can use dollar amounts, please do that with the financial aid offices in VSAC so that they can see how much of a difference this could make. for your child's financial aid or for your financial aid if you're a student. Additionally, we want students and families to be sure to research scholarships as well as apply for the scholarships. What I can tell you is that application fatigue is a very real thing. And so you're going through the Common App students and you're applying to colleges, and then we come up against the financial aid and you have to apply for financial aid. And then you start applying for scholarships and you have to write more essays and you have to get recommendations. By the time you get to local scholarships, like through your high school or towards some of the later scholarships that might be available, there's one in the VSAC scholarship book that's sponsored by the Vermont Principals Association. We do not administer the scholarship, but it's an application date of May 1st for a deadline. And it's for first generation college students. And so many times students are so tired from all the applications they've filled out that they neglect to keep with it and keep filling out those applications. So don't only research, also apply, get everything in. Ways to reduce costs. Sometimes you can look further at some institutions and they might have some, really good deals. When the exchange rate is great, Canadian schools are a great deal. Federal student aid, with the exception of student loans, does not come over to Canada, but the Vermont grant can if you have eligibility for a Vermont grant. Sometimes there are schools that, they have 48 states represented at their school and Vermont isn't one of them. I've heard of students getting scholarships in those situations. So think about possibly looking further away. Also consider dual enrollment or early college. Get some college credits under your belt. Advanced placement. Find out what AP scores might equate to credit at a different college or university. Because between dual enrollment, advanced placement, and or early college, some students can really significantly reduce their costs at college if they can graduate a semester early. Think about those net prices and divide them by half. That's a significant savings. NEBI is short for the New England Board of Higher Education, and they have a regional student program. So if we don't offer a major in Vermont, you can take that major at a New England school at a reduced rate of tuition. So you don't pay full out-of-state tuition at those schools. There are also some NEBI schools. I think UMass Lowell is one of them. I'll just put them as an example. They've actually said, no, it doesn't matter what major you are. If you're from New England, they'll pay our NEBI rate, which again, significant savings. Some students are encouraged to start at a school that costs less and then transfer. I'm going to pick on CCV, but there are a lot of transfer programs with CCV and four-year colleges in this area. So if your family makes less than $75,000 a year, you can do this almost on the cheap and then transfer to a four-year college and be able to do 2 years of more significant costs. We also recommend sometimes committing to consider attending local and commuting. And we recommend that because housing costs at some institutions are upwards of $15,000 to $17,000 a year between housing and meals. And so if you attend, if you stay home and you commute, you could really save a significant amount of money there. We also recommend that students consider service. Joining the Vermont Guard, Air or Army National Guard, they have a program that's a tuition payment program. For every 2 years of service, you get a free year of tuition at any of the state institutions or at private institutions. I think it's the equivalent of Vermont State University's tuition. And you can do that simultaneously while you're in school and serving. And then we also have this workforce development career focused funding. With these programs, usually you get what's called a forgivable loan. But for instance, for nursing, you get full tuition up to $16,000 a year. And with that, you agree to work in Vermont in nursing for 1 year for every year you've gotten that scholarship, and the loan is forgiven. If you decide not to live in Vermont, if you decide not to go into nursing, it becomes an interest-free loan, which is still a pretty great deal because it's interest-free. So that's something to check out and consider if you're, one of the majors that has been eligible for workforce development funding. And really, when we're talking about ways to pay, in addition to trying to reduce our costs to attend college, we are really looking at three legs of a stool, right? Many students and their parents use these three things as the leg of their stool. So past income, which are savings or college saving plan, present income, which might mean payment plans. Once students are in college, sometimes parents are eligible for tax credits. I know when my son was in school, we took those tax credits and we rolled them over into the next semester's bill. There are also scholarships, as we mentioned. Future income is borrowing. So there's a thing called a Parent Plus loan. It's a federal loan. There could be additional student loans. There could be private loans or non-federal loans. There could be borrowing options. At one point when home interest rates were really low, I would be doing these presentations in person, and some families would come up to me afterward and say, well, why should, I borrow at 6% when I can get a home equity line of credit at 3.5%? And I'd say, I don't see the difference, and I don't know if I can make an argument for this. So think about your other borrowing options. We don't want you to, second mortgage your home to the hilt, but it might be one of the borrowing options you have that's more cost friendly. And then also think about those workforce development and career focused funding programs and check those out. So the other thing I wanted to talk about ways to pay is, for instance, if you don't have one of these things, then you have to really rely more heavily on the others. So if you don't have any savings, you have to really rely more heavily on present income or on borrowing. If you don't have the ability to borrow, then you really need to lean more on your savings as well as payment plans in order to do this. Payment plans tend to be the cost of the college that you need to come up with is stretched out over 1 year, whereas a plus loan would be stretched out over 10 years. So just something to think about as you're considering these ways to pay. So one of the ways to pay is through savings. And really, the more you save, the less you have to borrow. We recommend that students think about what can you add to savings before you need to borrow for college. And how much can students add to their savings through summer employment or through gifts? Those might be things that you can consider. It's kind of a pretty popular myth that parent assets are weighed very heavily in the SAI calculation. And I would say that that's not necessarily true. Actually, parent assets are protected sometimes at more than 90%, thinking that parents have other things that they need to save for. They need to save for retirement. They need to save for a rainy day. And so sometimes families will say to me, we have $25,000. Do you think we should put a new roof on our house? And I usually respond with a question of, do you need a new roof? Because $25,000 in parental savings, let me just give you a feel here, that might impact a family's SAI by $1,700 to $2,000. And I think you might rather save that $25,000 and pay $2,000 out of it rather than spend that all and not have anything. So parent savings, just so you know, are really heavily protected in this process. Please do not feel you have to spend everything in your account before you apply for financial aid. Not true. Okay. Let's also talk about federal loans. So federal student loans are awarded by the college or university in their financial aid notification, but these federal loans have maximums as far as how much students can be eligible for. And so for what's called a dependent student, a student who is using their parental information when they file their FAFSA, the freshman year, the maximum is $5,500. That doesn't go a long way. Sophomore year, it's $6,500. Junior and senior year, it's $7,500. And you can see how that works out to a cumulative borrowed of $27,000 for a student who does a 4-year degree and doesn't do any extra time. What I can tell you is that the maximum amount that can be borrowed by a dependent student in the federal loans is $31,000. So if you have to do a 5th year, we don't have a lot of eligibility in loans left. So it's really important to think if you need extra time, to finish that degree. Let's talk a little bit more about student loan options. We recommend that students accept their federal student loans first. They tend to have a better interest rate, and they also have a lot of protections on them. You don't have to start repayment until 6 months after you're done with school. Some of those loans can be subsidized, which means the government will pay the interest on those loans while the student's in school. There are a number of repayment programs like income-based repayment or income, oh goodness, derived repayment. There's a bunch of them. But you want to accept these loans first, right? And I'm giving you the current interest rate for this school year because for seniors, we're not going to know what the interest rates will be probably for federal loans until June sometime, because each year on July 1st is when the U.S. Department of Education sets a new rate, excuse me. For non-federal loans, VSAC is a lender, but there's also a number of nonprofit organizations, banks, credit unions, other private lenders. And for our loans, it depends on when the student starts repayment. It can have an interest rate of 4.75 to 8.57%. The 4.75 is taking into consideration auto pay, which gives you an extra 0.25% taken off your interest rate if you agree to do auto pay. But we want you to compare these loans. The non-federal loans are the ones that we want you to look at very carefully and make sure that these are the things that will work best for you and your family situation. There are also parent loan options. And again, that Parent Plus loan, actually Plus is short for parent loans for undergraduate students. So the Plus loan for parents, actually, the interest rate, I think, is capped at 10.5%. We're at 9.8% this year. I'm really kind of hoping these will come down. But again, you want to compare those loans to the non-federal ones because you might be able to find a better interest rate with some of these loans. And also the Plus loans, they have a different way of looking at them as far as eligibility. They're really looking to make sure that the parent has no, nothing wrong, no marks down on their credit report. For instance, like past due payments or things like that. If a parent has a good repayment history, they can usually get approved for these Plus loans. For the non-federal loans, a lot of times it's a little bit more complicated in that they are really looking at your credit score and things like that. So again, you want to compare these loans. You will get information with, I don't want to call them teaser rates, but you'll get things in the mail that say, pick our loan. You can have it as low as 4%. And you go to apply, and then you find out it's 8.5%. And so for some families, one of the things I recommend is shopping around for a loan, for a student loan or a parent loan, is a lot like shopping around for a car. If there are multiple hits to your credit report, they're going to count that as you're shopping around for this parent or student loan. So if you are not happy with that interest rate, you feel like you can do better, keep going, keep applying, find the one that works best for you. So let's talk just a little bit more about these non-federal loans, shall we? We want to talk about things to consider with these non-federal loans. So if a student borrows a non-federal loan, they are almost always required to have a cosigner. And the cosigner is equally liable for the debt. They're expected to make payments if the student borrower doesn't pay. They are also billed monthly along with the borrower. And it's also reported to national credit bureaus monthly along with the borrower. And the cosigner must sign all the paperwork along with the borrower. So most student borrowers have to have this cosigner. And so it's really important to think about that. And, does the family have the ability to do this, to cosign? Other things to think about before you borrow is to research and find the best rate and repayment plan, not only for the borrower, but also for the cosigner. So look at what the borrower benefits might be. For instance, that interest rate reduction for auto pay, like VSAC offers, a temporary suspension of payments if you're having difficulty paying. and cosigner release after a certain number of payments. So for instance, I'm going to pick on VSAC just because I know that best. With our non-federal loans, our cosigners can be released after 48 months of on-time payments. You cannot send us 48 payments in one payment and say, here's your 4 years. I'd like to be off the cosigner. Not able to do that. But after 48 payments on time, the cosigner can be released from that loan. Let's talk a little bit about calculators. So online, there's a federal student aid estimator. And if you type in federal student aid estimator, you can find the SAI calculator as well as estimates of federal aid. It's based on this year's information, so the 24-25 school year, because they don't have that yet for next year. And then Mapping Your Future has a great student loan debt to salary wizard, which I think is really helpful to think about. If I borrow this amount and I do that every year for 4 years, what will the monthly payments look like? Because it's really going to be important not only to think about getting through 1 year of payments, but also thinking about if it's a 2-year school, thinking about 2 years of payments. If it's a 4-year school, thinking about 4 years of borrowing and payments. So that's another place where families can do homework. We have a junior year planning checklist as well as a senior year planning checklist. I don't know if this is available in the school counseling office in the Direction Center at CVU. But if it's not, you can request one from the VSAC website. So we have the junior year planning checklist as well as the senior year planning checklist. And what I want to tell you about these checklists is, for instance, if you didn't do the things you needed to do in September, don't panic. You are not out of the running in the financial aid process. It's just you have some things to catch up on. You will not, be blocked out of getting federal student aid or college institutional aid. But we talk about those next steps for the senior year. So you're researching what forms and deadlines need to be met. What we recommend, especially for the FAFSA, is to meet your earliest deadline. Or for the CSS profile, you can do the same thing, meet your earliest deadline. Create student aid accounts, right? Also called the FSA ID, one for the student and one, possibly two, for the parents. Create a MyVSAC account for the student. You can do all of these right now. Gather the family financial information to file applications. You can file the Vermont grant application now and the FAFSA after December 1st. You can file VSAC Unified Scholarship application. We have a scholarship book. I jokingly call it the $6 million book because there's a lot of money in scholarships available in there. And so you want to get that booklet, and you can file one unified scholarship application for all of the VSAC scholarships that we administer. And then you can also apply for other scholarships. We have a lot of information on our website about financial aid and college costs and how you pay for college. So vsac.org/pay resources. We have a lot of information there for families. We also have a paying for college guide that's available online. We don't have a print version available, but you can download it to your computer if you wish. And then once financial aid, once the FAFSA is available, I think we're going to be starting December 10th. If you need financial aid forms help, you can get phone call help with FAFSA and the federal student aid number. You can call us at VSAC with FAFSA questions. The FAFSA has a chat bot while you're filling out the application. They also have a chat process that you can use. VSAC will be offering virtual and in-person FAFSA help. And that's what I meant by we'll start that December 10th. We'll run through January. But you can check out vsac.org events, and we will have those posted probably right around Thanksgiving. Or you can email us, resourcecenter@vsac.org, to either request an appointment or to ask a question. We do have folks available there. I'm one of them. And I did talk quite a bit about loans and shopping around. We have an education loan guide that we're particularly proud of at VSAC. It is not necessarily about borrowing VSAC loans, but we have this expanded section about ways to minimize education debt. And we put this book together with college financial aid offices. We put this together with current college students and people who had graduated from college, as well as parents. And so we've got this education loans brochure with a lot of the information that you might not even know you need. But we recommend that you get this as well. You can order a printed copy from us at vsac.org. It's also available online if you just would rather download. And Naomi, are more questions in the chat?
We do have a few more questions here. Okay, so somebody asked how we get a copy of these slides. They'll be posted both on the Direction Center website and on the VSAC website. Some of these you've answered, I think. You've talked about that you get the FSA ID specifically by going to, is it studentaid.gov, Carrie?
It is. Go to studentaid.gov and there's a create account button at the top right of the page, if that helps.
Great. And then as far as linking the parent and student account, that's pretty self-explanatory once you start doing it, right?
So you do not link the parent and student account. What's really interesting is one person in this process will invite the other. So for instance, if the student starts the FAFSA, it will ask who will be a contributor on this form. This is about contributing information, not about contributing money. I want to be clear. But who's contributing information on this form? The student will put in the parent's information. I highly recommend that the parents sit there with the student while they're doing it, because sometimes a name is spelled wrong or a date of birth is wrong just because of misentering, not even because they didn't know, but just because they hit the 2 rather than the 3. So if the parent sits with the student while they do the invite, we find more success with that. And so the student invites the parent gets an invitation, they log into a FAFSA and they put in their information. If the parent starts the form, it says, who are you filling this out for? And they would put in the student's information. They will not ask for the FSA ID, but they'll ask for the students, they'll ask for the invitee's name, email address, social security number, and date of birth. And that's how they know who to send an email to and say, hey, Jason needs your help with his FAFSA. And they'll get that and they'll use that link and go right there. So there is a link. You're right. They're not linked together, but they do get a link to just click on and go to the FAFSA. Great. And like I said, we're available if more questions come up. We also, go ahead.
Yep, I do have a couple more. Sorry, it's the delay between the two screens here. So as far as the definition for a first-generation college student goes, a first-generation college student is still considered first-gen if their parent has an associate's degree, correct?
For many programs, yes. For federal programs, for instance, the TRIO grants, Gear Up, things like that, first generation is neither parent has a 4-year degree.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question here related to the federal direct student loans and wondering if they are variable or fixed at the time of origination.
I love that question. So federal student loans are a fixed rate, and it's a fixed rate for that year. So for instance, students are borrowing under a certain rate this year. That will be that rate for the life of the loan unless they decide to consolidate. The next year, there'll be another loan. And that loan might have a different interest rate, but that will be the interest rate for that loan until the end. The next year, for federal student loans, again, it may have a different interest rate, but that loan will have that interest rate for the life of the loan. Where we have a change is if a student, after they graduate, decides to consolidate them all together. And then I think what happens when they all come together is it's a weighted average of those interest rates. But it is a fixed rate, not variable. And that is a great question where you're thinking about non-federal loans too. Are these fixed rates or are they variable?